Chapter 14. Guillotine Steelworker had said that the seal he'd made was only possible for golems to create. Shin Woo didn't think that was a lie. But even so, it didn't seem like it'd be impossible to recreate it. It's possible to copy a golem's mana pattern, so there's no way it'd be impossible to copy the seal. But it wasn't something he'd be able to do in the foreseeable future. Because of that, Shin Woo thoroughly examined each golem as best as he could, indulged in the core's knowledge, and broke apart the low-ranked golems to try to familiarize himself with the golems themselves. What are you going to do by copying that? I'm going to try controlling the golems. You're trying to control a Rama steelworker? Nope. That guy's probably impossible for me to control. From the start, Shin Woo hadn't even caught a glimpse of the highest authority over the golems. If he more deeply examined the golems, as well as absorbed more cores, he thought he'd be able to figure it out someday, but he knew that now wasn't the time. For starters, his goal would be to obtain Guillotine Steelworker's Administrator Seal. So, he would gather all of the abandoned golems in the Empire and create his own core of golems. That was his goal. If a Rama Steelworker had heard him say that, he'd be speechless and fall flat on his face. I'm not going to just destroy golems, so don't worry. If that's all I was going to do, then why would I have taken the train and come out here? We have to take care of the undead nearby, too. Yay, I'm so happy. They activated the elevator through the General Administrative Seal and went outside. While the west side consisted of stiff highlands, the landscape here was way too different. They wanted to check where they'd surfaced, but that was impossible. I wonder where our seniors are. They should be in the center of the Empire. Shin Woo and Jin had grown drastically, but their seniors were mostly level 6, or perhaps even higher. They still had a lot of catching up to do. Of course, even if they did reach their level, they absolutely wouldn't be able to stand before them and reveal themselves to them. Would they be able to make them cease their deep-seated hatred towards the undead by just saying that they were heroes? Honestly, he was really doubtful of that right now. Detecting trespasser. Repelling them as a top priority. So like I was saying, just take them down for now. I can't raise my abilities by fighting against them anymore. A golem's greatest strength was that they had a sturdy base, but that could be a weakness as well. They were too unaccustomed to irregularities. From the very beginning, they were much too easy to take down for Shin Woo, whose specialty was his irregular fighting style that lacked a concrete form. Hearing that, Jin thought that he was shamefully boasting, but like always, he couldn't deny it. I want to observe the golems more thoroughly. So, charge. Sup, I guess it can't be helped. Jin gallantly galloped forth, with his body enveloped in steel like mana. Shin Woo saw the golems switch their battle formations to intercept him, and leisurely observed their mana patterns. Of course, because he was maintaining his General Administrative Seal, all of the golems aggroed on Jin. I've been fighting too much lately, so I've been tired. No one would say anything if he took a really quick break in between analyzing the mana. Probably. He nodded his head and continued observing. However, he started to get bored from just observing and studying, so he decided to open the chatting channel. Mr. Shin Woo has entered. Jin, it's been a long time. Shin Woo. Yeah, it has. You're still alive? Lloyd HK. Geez, I have no idea who's the senior and who's the newbie here. Prince Altania. Shin Woo. How much more have you got before you're level 5? Shin Woo. I should reach it soon. I only have about 10 more stats to go. It was a lie, of course, but they thought of 10 stats differently than him, so he had no choice. Prince Altania. Holy shit. You're really close. Even if his starting specs were high, this guy. He's probably not more talented than me though, right? Yasunori Akira. Your talent is common amongst heroes. Doesn't it seem strange that you're comparing yourself to Shin Woo, who everyone has high expectations for? Prince Altania. What? You want to go? Are you looking for a fight? Yasunori Akira. Peeved. As always, his seniors responded to him affectionately. Shin Woo suddenly thought, after being greeted by each and every one of them. Yi Jin knew about his true nature, but how would his seniors react when they saw him? Would they accept him? Would they reject him? Would they pity him? The more he learned about the underground empire, as well as the heroes, the more he thought about his true identity. Perhaps it wouldn't be as simple as he thought. At some point, that thought had begun to grow more and more. It's a relief that I met Yi Jin when she was still naive and gave her a good impression of me. He thought it might have been the right decision to hide his identity and spoke calmly. Shin Woo. Not much happened while I was away, right? Lloyd HK. Ah, now that I think about it, you may not know. A newbie came in. Shin Woo. A newbie. Of course, he was already well aware that it was quite common for heroes to trickle in, but it felt a bit strange that he already had a junior. Then, Prince Altania spoiled the mood. Prince Altania. What a mannerless brat. They came in just a little while ago and then left right after. Aryan Rendu? Mannerless? They could just be extremely individualistic. Sir Altania. Lloyd HK. Individualistic, huh? That's the most dangerous tendency to have. If you're not as strong as Akira, that is. Yasunori Akira. Don't call me by my name. Well, they'll prove it soon. Whether it was arrogance or skill. Yi Jin. Mr. Shin Woo, how have you been? I finally reached level 4. Shino Rendu. You've been dawdling all this time, yet once you found a man, you've become unstoppable. Huh? Yi Jin. What are you talking about? Shin Woo adequately told his seniors, who quarreled amongst each other and amicably went back and forth in their conversations, about himself as well as keeping some parts of himself secret, while also hearing about the situation in the empire. He even tried to ask them about the 12 generals, but to no avail. Prince Altania. Huh, the 12 generals? I'll be straight with you. We haven't even reached the capital, let alone the major city. It's kind of discouraging, but it's impossible to fight a general before you're level 7. Lloyd HK. Would it even be possible just by reaching level 7? You'd need to be packed with level 4 artifacts, as well as heroes using their full strength. Even then, they'd barely be able to take one down. Our senior told us that before, remember? Prince Altania. Hang. As long as you and I are there, we can do it. Aryan Rendu. I'm level 6 now, too. Lloyd. When the time comes, you can count on me. Just taking a peek into the chatting channel, one could tell that they had the energy of top-class celebrities. Lloyd, who'd even been recognized by that harsh prince, was dazzling. To the point that he felt jealous. If he had still been human, could he have been like him? However, he snorted at such fruitless thoughts and left the chatting channel. Jin was still vigorously rampaging about and breaking apart the golems. What the hell, man? You weren't even watching and were doing something else, weren't you? UMHP. Ceasing function. Ceasing function. Of course not. Shin Woo saw a group of golems falling with a single kick of Jin's hind legs and laughed calmly as he replied. Jin had adapted much faster than he'd expected, so he decided that when Jin had become somewhat proficient in combat, he would study basic strategy for fighting on horseback with him. Hey, you help too. Are these all of the reinforced cores? TCH. Okay, let's quickly take care of the rest. As soon as Jin had finished taking care of all the level 4 bronze golems in the center, Shin Woo participated in the battle. Since it'd be difficult to accumulate any combat experience fighting against level 3 golems, it didn't matter who destroyed them. However, he realized something new here. It was possible to summon copies of the same equipment stored through Bone Armory. Go! Triple axe! Whoa! They kept fighting, and Jin, who'd gotten slightly confident in his abilities, saw Shin Woo destroying the defense-type golems left and right with 3 melting bone double axes flying across the battlefield, and fell down in the dumps again. But Shin Woo, who had excitedly realized the latent potential of his ability, didn't have time to be considerate of Jin's feelings. The 3 giant axes flew naturally like boomerangs, and the sight of his axes wildly plowing through the golems was in and of itself a disaster. What's worse, he even blew up one of his axes in an area where several golems had gathered. Explode! A poison mist burst here and there across the battlefield, turning them into rock dust. The level 3 golems were now nothing more than targets that stood still to him. The power of levels and items was this absolute. Ceasing fun. Function. Hup. Ceasing function. It was really satisfying that he was able to take out his anger on these low golems, the anger of bowing down to high-level golems. Whenever a golem's function would cease, the golems would exchange signals amongst themselves and would run away from him. Shin Woo clearly saw them running away and mercilessly destroyed them all. It was a really wholesome time. As a result, Bone Original Core, Reinforced Autonomous Defense Type Bone Core, Original Core Synchronization Rate, 58%. So I have about 1 and a 1/2. TCH. You look really scary. In the first area, he had been able to create 2 Bone Original Cores, but probability was indifferent to that. He just clicked his tongue, stored the half-completed Bone Core, and took out the completed one. Jin was already afraid and stepped back. You don't need to be so afraid. Since I need to be the one absorbing them for the time being if I'm to match your growth rate. Thanks. He activated Bone Reinforcement and used the Bone Original Core. Despite it being his second time absorbing it and its effectiveness being much worse, it still increased his strength by 7, agility by 11, health by 9, and magic by 6. At the same time, an unfamiliar memory flowed into his mind. He was lucky. He was able to acquire a memory of their process of creating a code to control the golems. The golem's master can only be the Emperor. Aside from him, no one else can command us. We've only just completed your seal, Sir Arama. The seal holds the highest authority, second only to the Emperor. To think that the circuit can only be created through a golem's mana. Isn't that interesting? Shin Woo momentarily shook his head and clearly remembered the appearance of the seal. At the same time, he realized why Guillotine had said it was impossible for others to recreate it. All beings are born with mana that possesses innate characteristics, and artificial life forms were not exempt. Within their inorganic bodies, golems stored and handled mana, and a high-ranked seal was created by the mana tinged with the innate characteristics of that inorganic body. Arama Steelworker's seal could only be manifested by using the mana that made up his core, which would signify that the seal was only for his use. It was truly a secure security system. The issue isn't the complexity of handling your mana. It's like using orange juice to make clear ice. It'll take a while. Shin Woo clicked his tongue. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he didn't know where to start. Though the logic behind it was somewhat similar to changing his mana into acid or flames, he wasn't even able to handle those that proficiently yet. Shin Woo, what's wrong? Does your head hurt? No, not at all. Shin Woo bluffed and raised his head. Though Jin had realized that he was bluffing, he didn't really point it out. Jin had realized that if Shin Woo showed a bit of honesty, he was still all right. It won't help if I just hang around here. Like I had originally thought, I have no choice but to go at it while I deal with other business. At the end of his pondering, he cleanly recognized that his skills were lacking and made up his mind. He wasn't giving up. Shin Woo just decided that he wouldn't rush and would slowly work at it whilst taking care of other business at the same time. With that in mind, let's go down. How can a person live off killing golems? You have a multiple personality disorder, right? Right? Even while he complained, Jin and Shin Woo went down the highlands and surveyed their surroundings. However, they didn't really get anything out of that. It seemed as though one of their senior heroes had gone through this place already, as there weren't any undead here, and it was completely clean. This became more apparent soon after they felt a refreshing feeling when they entered a city on the outskirts without any undead in sight. Sup. Let's go someplace else. There might be another city, as well as a dungeon nearby. In no time at all, Jin had resigned himself and spoke aloofly, figuring out what Shin Woo wanted. However, Shin Woo firmly shook his head. There's a place we need to examine before we leave here. Quote, ? Can't you see that the city's clean? No, there's a place where it's highly likely that it hasn't been cleared yet. And where's that? Jin tilted his head, but Shin Woo just grinned and led Jin. All Jin felt was a sense of gloomy foreboding, but he followed behind Shin Woo regardless. You have discovered the polluted sewer facility. All stats increase by 5 within. And less than 3 hours later, they entered into a desolate, hidden underground facility. There were elite skeletons that stood in front of them in an orderly fashion whilst continuously spewing out jet black mana. My name is Paul 13. I have to punish the erroneous emperor. To think that there are still this many men who still follow General Segald. We have all been given a new name and purpose. Paul 0. Paul 0. Paul 0. Yes, yes. I know my name is Paul 0, so you don't have to keep shouting it. Shin Woo, what was your original goal again? Well, since we're already here, might as well. On that day, 8 new elite skeletons were born, Paul 13 through Paul 20. No one yet knew that a new force was being formed within the Empire. 2 more weeks passed. Shin Woo and Jin started at the southern outskirts, and after searching through the city in the area, they took the train and returned east. After checking that area, they took the train once again, and reached the Empire's northern outskirts. Right now, they were slowly clearing the outer edges of the Empire, something that no other hero could have even attempted. Since they had procured a means of transportation, they decided they might as well clear the outskirts of the Empire. Though the scale was obviously much too large to say that they were doing it just because they could. Ah, there's one here too. They didn't go through here. Of course, most of the areas had been cleared by the other heroes, and in some places, it seemed as though the golems had vanished without a trace, so at times, it was a fruitless effort. But there was a place with a 100% chance of remaining, which was none other than the city's underground sewers dungeons. I hope this place is less dirty than the last place. Give up. Let's go in. Damn it. Shin Woo was now fully aware that the reason the other heroes didn't go through the underground passages was because they were dirty. He thought the other heroes were foolish for not going through the sewers just so they could avoid getting dirtied. It wasn't even very difficult to wash off the filth. But in any case, because they did, Shin Woo and Jin could profit off of it, so he didn't really think about it too deeply. As a result, Shin Woo had another task that clearly bore more fruit than his original goal of either creating another bone original core or procuring a high-rank administrative authority. The number of undead who have been given a new name by you and have thus been reborn as named monsters has surpassed 100. Without even thinking about the consequences and acting on a whim are truly the actions of a joker. All stats have increased by 5. You have satisfied a part of the conditions to obtain the Joker's innate skill. It was to revive the failed experimental subjects of the Anti-Skull Project as elite skeletons. Since the experiments were performed without the Emperor's knowledge, there was almost a 100% chance that a hidden facility would exist within the outskirt city's sewers. Even if we look for General Segald, we probably wouldn't be able to help very much. We'd rather follow you, Captain. We'll help our captain. No. I have something else I have to do. Think about what you guys can do and go do it. Paul 107. As expected of our captain. You're saying that we have to find our own path. There was a special characteristic that was commonplace amongst the skeletons that had been awakened as named elites by Shin Woo. No matter what he said, they would understand and be moved. We'll definitely repay Captain one day, the one who awakened us. We may have undying bodies, but let's make it to the end together, Captain. Yeah. You guys don't die, too. The skeletons developed loyalty to him all on their own and promised to meet with him again, yet Shin Woo just responded with a lukewarm gaze. Honestly, level 3 elite monsters didn't really matter to him anymore. He'd said this time after time, but this was just something he was doing on the way to killing golems. And if you meet the other Pauls, make sure you travel together. I understand, Captain. And that's the last thing he said to them formally. They were sacrificed in the same experiment, were likewise reborn as elite undead, and were a similar level, so that's why he said it. However, the Pauls earnestly responded to his request and left the sewers. Jin watched their appearances from behind and asked Shin Woo, "Do you have some sort of special skill that turns the undead into elite monsters?" "Nope. I just make them feel as though they had an important mission while they were still alive, and they just awaken on their own." Despite him achieving the feat of going around and changing people's fates, Shin Woo responded extremely calmly. Seeing that, Jin was speechless. Shin Woo had only given him a rough explanation of how his Joker karma worked. There are no rewards here, either. Well, it is the outskirts after all. Let's clear this place and then go to somewhere with a danger level of 2. A danger level of 2. Based on their seniors' classifications, who had already explored the Empire is apparently divided into 5 danger levels from the outskirts to the center. The first place they encounter once entering the Empire has a danger level of 0, and messy natural environments. Apparently, a lot of animal-type undead appear here, whereas the small towns in between are level 1. So, Shin Woo and Jin were currently clearing out areas that were danger level 0 to 1. If they used pizza as a comparison, they were going around and eating the crust first. The natural environment is getting a bit better, and the commercial cities, where we're more likely to encounter the Empire's elite troops, have a danger level of 2. They're the places that the heroes stay in when they're at around level 4 or 5. And the satellite cities, which are directly connected to these commercial cities, have a danger level of 3. Apparently, most of the heroes are around this area. The large city was a level 4 danger zone, and was allocated tasks by the capital. Naturally, the center of the Empire, the capital, held a danger level of 5. It was difficult for even their senior heroes to explore the areas that were of danger level 4, so there wasn't much more he could hear from them. There's definitely a supply line that passes through a large city with a danger level of 4. Originally, there was a supply line that passed through the capital, but in the process of running from the capital with his subordinates, Arama steelworker completely destroyed that railway. If that railway had still existed and if no one else had discovered it, it would have been possible to infiltrate the capital, so it kind of felt like a waste. Then shall we look around and see if there are any other small towns nearby? Ah, all right. Shin Woo had been imagining events that had yet to come, but when he heard Jin speak, he stopped thinking about it. Yeah, there should be another way to infiltrate the capital. Your plan already went that far. The two crawled out of the sewers. When they had looked from the highlands, they had seen another small town to the west, so they decided to go there and look before getting on the train. Generally, the other heroes would purify one small town and then immediately move on to the next area, so he had hoped that there were some undead still remaining over there. Then, However, Shin Woo, who'd turned his head towards the west where the small town was, suddenly felt an unfamiliar, but powerful trace of mana, causing his goblin fire to wriggle around. It was a mana pattern that he'd felt somewhere before. When he deliberated as to where, he concluded that it was definitely similar to Jin's mana. Ah, that's right. It was the mana of a living being. He was proud of himself for being able to categorize the mana and grinned. Shin Woo's face hardened and he rode atop Jin's back. Let's run for now. Our concept is secrecy, isn't it? That's a good idea. Jin also didn't like taking unnecessary risks. The two reached an agreement, and then Jin dashed in a straight line towards the highlands while Shin Woo activated his connection with Jin and stealth simultaneously, hiding their tracks as much as possible. Their practice fighting together bore fruit and they were able to achieve considerable results. However, what the hell? Aren't they getting closer? What, really? The problem was that their opponent was much more talented than they could have imagined. Shin Woo, what do we do? Should we just release stealth and just run at full speed? That seems like a better idea. All right. Hold on tight. Gah! Their combat abilities weren't the only thing that improved from them clearing out the golems in the highlands and hopping from one sewer system to another. Though Jin had only absorbed 3 cores, he was able to use the magic and martial arts knowledge within in order to better utilize his agility. Above all, he'd learned how to correct his speed and stability through magic, and as a result, managed to increase his already fraudulent speed. If he broke their connection, and Jin focused solely on reaching his destination, most people wouldn't even be able to see him as he was running so fast. I'm going even faster. Ah, shit. Damn it. However, the speed made Shin Woo feel as though he would be thrown off, and despite experiencing it in real time, he spoke out in a voice tinged with despair. He didn't know how, but their opponent was gradually getting closer. One moment I can't sense them, and in the next, they've gotten closer. This keeps happening over and over again. Wait a sec, is this some sort of teleportation magic? Since he'd been dropped into the underground empire, he'd experienced all kinds of magical situations. However, he'd never experienced any mainstream magic before. Because of that, his deduction had been late. If it wasn't physically possible to catch up to them, then the only other answer was magic. Lend me the Queen's unmelting ice. He sensed that they'd gotten even closer. Moreover, he even heard their incantation for what he assumed was an offensive spell. Shin Woo was slightly shocked by the pristinely beautiful voice he heard casting the spell. He was especially shocked at the incantation that openly revealed that the spell was an ice-type attack. But wait, they were thankful that their opponent was going to cast their spell where everyone could hear it, but since it was so easy to predict, it became so boring. And annihilate all that is unjust, bringing about an eternal snow that purifies. In the time it took for them to blink, they had arrived at the center of the highlands. However, around that time, their opponent had gotten close enough that they could see them with the naked eye. Appear. Shin Woo turned around slightly and checked their opponent's identity. They wore robes, covering their foreheads such that he couldn't get a close look at them, but in any case, he was sure that it was a living person. They were probably a hero at that. Wall of TCH. Yeah, he understood. They just saw a skeleton riding atop a galloping skeleton horse, so as a hero, it made sense that they wanted to attack them. But before they followed through, they should have given them a signal. No wait, I guess they don't have to. Ice. Flames of revenge. They had finished casting their spell. At the same time, they felt a chill surge from beneath their feet, and Shin Woo somehow used flames of revenge in time. It seemed obvious, but it was impossible for the spell to cover the entire area. Shin Woo was satisfied with covering just himself and Jin with the flames and yelled. Jin, run! I can fly! One. Jin dashed through the air. It was truly a beautiful leap. They dodged the enormous ice walls that surged from the floor with a force that touched the underground empire's ceiling. Ice arrow shower. How persistent! The magician's ice walls tried to keep them in place, but lost much of their power due to the flames of revenge. However, it seemed as though their opponent still had mana to spare, as they followed up with another spell. They didn't even need to cast the spell for very long, and it was a low-ranked spell, but the sheer number of them was considerable. The air was instantly filled to the brim with ice arrows, and those arrows rushed towards them, aiming only for them. Shin Woo! It's okay. If their opponent used lightning, wind, or flames, it might have gotten dangerous for them, but ice magic was fine. Shin Woo hugged Jin's neck and covered themselves entirely in the flames of revenge. At the same time, he shared his intermediate ice resistance through the contract. It was an absurdly high-ranked skill technique. Intermediate ice protection will protect your partner as well, blocking at least 70% of the attack. The intermediate ice resistance skill has become LV2. Magic has increased by 5. The barrage of ice arrows fell upon them instantly and pounded on their bodies. No, rather than pounding them, most of the ice arrows' damage dissipated due to his ice resistance, and the flames of revenge melted the rest. He had been confident, but it was such a perfect defense that he praised himself. How can an undead possess such a high-rank mana technique? Seriously, how amazing must it have been if his opponent had stopped their attack in shock. However, now wasn't the time to be impressed. Before his opponent regained their cool and started attacking again, Shin Woo wanted to do away with the status quo, so he yelled. Stop! What? Their opponent flinched at his voice, as it definitely contained a will behind it. Li Shin Woo took that opportunity to yell loudly, which reverberated across the highlands. Friendly fire! Friendly fire! That's right! I'm a hero! A hero! The magician muttered blankly. Hearing an undead assert that they were a hero must have considerably shaken them. They had already stopped attacking. Li Shin Woo felt relieved in that regard, but then Jin yelled startlingly. The ground! The ground! TCH! The problem was the spell that they'd cast before was still around. The wall, composed of sharp thorns of ice, were surging upwards several dozens of meters. Now wasn't the time to be relieved. Hup! Without thinking, Li Shin Woo brought out a melting double bone axe and threw it hard. The axe shattered the wall's sharp edges and exploded the moment it lodged into the wall's interior. Even though they had responded a bit late, Li Shin Woo and Jin somehow managed to come out relatively unscathed amidst the shards of ice. I thought we'd become skewers. Don't worry, we don't have any meat to grill, so. Wait, no. It's my fault. I'm sorry. Stop shaking. You're really terrible. You know that? Absolutely terrible. It was all my fault. I'm really sorry. Stop shaking. It certainly doesn't seem like you've been affected by the curse. While Li Shin Woo and Jin were struggling to find a way to survive, the magician watched them and spoke to herself. But for now, they had completely ignored the magician in favor of reaching safe ground. They barely felt at ease. Are you really heroes? Even though you're undead? At last, she went back to questioning them. The slim woman stretched her hand outwards from her magician robes, holding an orb that looked like a crystal. It seemed as though she had her magic at the ready depending on how they responded. We're undead, but we're definitely heroes. If the situation wasn't favorable for them, and he assumed that they'd ultimately have to fight the magician. He analyzed his opponent's magic, and while doing so, picked one of the lines that only a hero would know to say and just said it. If you can't believe me, then would you like to access the chatting channel together and check? The chatting channel. Right, there was that. It hit the mark. The magician's hostility towards them was noticeably diminishing. He also considered that she might be a hero that attacked, saying, "Death to all the undead," even after acknowledging his claim, but fortunately, it looked like she had abandoned all thoughts of attacking them. It was impossible to ascertain your identity, so I thought maybe. I couldn't bring myself to discard the possibility that were you some unknown undead. Sorry for attacking you. Now that I think about it. She'd even given them an earnest apology. Even after hearing that, Li Shin Woo inspected her, but he couldn't figure anything out about her. A hero's fundamental ability of checking their opponent's level and identity didn't work on her. Now that he thought about it, it didn't work on Jin or Yi Jin either. If that's the case, then it should have been plenty enough to discern that they were heroes, but Li Shin Woo decided he'd double-check that in the chatting channel later and replied. I'm Li Shin Woo. This guy's Jin. For the record, this guy's a hero too. Krasia Meloy, 1. The magician threw her robe's hood back, revealing her face and name. She was a young lady whose beauty matched her beautiful voice. She was short, so he had roughly assumed that she was a woman before, but she looked younger than he'd expected, so Li Shin Woo was shocked. Her eyes were a sky blue, like the frozen sea, with large pupils. Her lavender hair, which stretched in every which way as if she didn't bother to comb it, was especially memorable. To be completely honest, her appearance matched well with the magic she wields. In any case, I've never seen someone called Krasia Meloy enter the chatting channel before. Wait a sec. Assuming that she wasn't lying, as she gave her name and showed her appearance, there was someone who matched her description. How long has it been since you've arrived here? 3 weeks. As I thought. She was definitely the newbie that he'd heard about in the chatting channel a short while ago. Krasia must have been the one who had entered the chatting channel once and left immediately, as she felt uncomfortable with all of the seniors' attention on her. His seniors did say that she didn't enter again following that incident. But what was surprising was that it had only been 3 weeks since she'd been dropped underground, yet the level of her magic was considerable. Li Shin Woo couldn't even assess the level of her magic, so that meant she was at least higher than level 5. But if that were true, that meant that she started out with that much power. Otherwise, she had to have received that power from God. Do I become like you guys by any chance if a lot of time goes by? The magician, Kraisha Meloy, asked, her eyes filled with a bit of fear. Lee Shin Woo and Jin simultaneously shook their heads and denied her. This confirmed that she was indeed a newbie hero. We became like this because of our wishes. On the flip side, there were some things we got in exchange, but I can't really recommend it. You became undead because of your wishes? As I thought, that woman's got a mental disorder or something. She nonchalantly insulted God and shook her head. And even though he didn't ask, she extended her hand gripping the orb and said, I don't like other people touching me. So when I asked for ice that could grow, she gave me this. So she could fulfill that wish because you were already strong, huh? Though she was originally a powerful magician, there should have been a limit to what God could give her with her powers. She'd successfully managed to receive an artifact that developed all on its own, so she may have made the best choice. If his senior heroes were to have heard, they would have said something like, you should have asked for a skill that improves the effectiveness of ice-type abilities, and would have been frustrated in her stead. Shin Woo, what are you going to do? Right when he was finished thinking, Jin whispered to Lee Shin Woo. Jin, who was easily frightened, seemed to still be afraid of Kraisha, as he was secretly hiding behind his back. Is this really the guy who courageously yelled out that when they died, they would die together? Lee Shin Woo softly stroked his back to tell him it was all right and said his farewells to Kraisha. I don't think there are a lot of cases like us, but be careful from now on. Then, we'll get going. It was nice meeting you, Kraisha Meloy. Wait a sec. He got atop Jin's back and tried turning around, but Kraisha's sudden urgent voice stopped them. Lee Shin Woo felt Jin inwardly yell as he'd wanted to leave smoothly. I know I've been somewhat foolish. Teach me about how this world works. If you just enter the chatting channel, our seniors will scramble to teach to you. Especially Lloyd and Prince. Those guys make me feel uneasy. I also haven't seen their faces even once. Kraisha asserted quite firmly. Their seniors had a tendency to be way too excited when a newbie comes in, so it was understandable that she felt unnerved by them. Moreover, though he hadn't known her for very long, this woman didn't seem to like socializing very much. Even so, didn't it seem weird that she trusted an undead whose face she'd seen, rather than a human whose face she hadn't seen? At least, that's what Lee Shin Woo thought. But you're okay. And I'm curious. She probably isn't the type to like undead more than humans. Lee Shin Woo tilted his head, wondering what he had to say, and replied in a way that went beyond his imagination. The way you use your magic. I want to learn it too. Oh, you were curious about that? I'm not asking to learn for free. I have a good grasp on magic as well. There's probably stuff that I can help with for you too as well. The situation was taking a turn beyond his wildest imagination. Lee Shin Woo had originally thought that it would be a waste of time and that he should just refuse, but he stopped for two separate reasons. First off, no matter how he looked at it, she was a professionally trained magician, and would naturally know more about magic across the board. There's a chance he'd profit from this exchange of knowledge, but honestly, there was also a chance that he would gain absolutely nothing. And secondly, he hadn't yet found a way to create a high-rank administrative authority. If he were to get a hint from her regarding changes in the characteristics of mana, wouldn't this be considered progress as well? He thought it wouldn't be bad to bet on this, rather than continuously hunting golems at a snail's pace. Shin Woo, you're not going to, are you? Well, it actually doesn't sound too bad. Lee Shin Woo commented in favor, and Jin weighed in with a slightly displeased tone. Is it because she's pretty? I'd like to act immature and senseless like that sometime too. Lee Shin Woo scolded and turned his head towards Kraisha. He'd made up his mind, and already finished talking with his partner, so now it was time to earnestly negotiate terms. We can't stay with you forever. 2 weeks. Promise that you'll sincerely cooperate, even if you don't gain what you want. You have my word. I promise upon the everlasting mana. Promise that whatever goes on between us, you leak nothing to the outside. Likewise. All right. Then we'll be in your care for 2 weeks. So, Kraisha. Nice meeting you, Shin Woo. Shin Woo thoughtlessly extended his right hand, a habit from his time as a human, and Kraisha unhesitatingly grabbed his bare bone hand. She really didn't care that he was undead, and proved that she was only interested in his knowledge and ability. Though their purity was directed at different things, Shin Woo suddenly thought that in terms of innocence, she and Yi Jin were quite similar. From right beside him, Jin then asked, "Then what do I do? What are you talking about? You're the one who needs systematic instruction on magic. We're 1+1, remember? I knew this would happen." Even whilst complaining, Jin strangely felt moved that Shin Woo was looking out for him. Seeing Jin, who'd come into possession of such a twisted feeling, Kraisha seemed to be concerned about something and her eyes brightened. She soon tilted her head and turned her attention to Shin Woo. "Then let's get going immediately. I want to know how your power works." "Hey, wait. Didn't you want to learn about all that common knowledge you were missing? I can just hear that stuff with the time we have left over." She wasn't reversing their priority. From the very beginning, her primary objective was magic. Shin Woo thought he somewhat understood her personality, shrugged his shoulders, and with no alternatives, just began talking. Shin Woo and Jin explained that they had a special contract, and using the resulting connection that came from using the horseback riding skill, could share their skills and resistances with each other. After hearing of this, it didn't take long before Kraisha became disappointed. "But it's fine. Since the way you use your mana is plenty interesting. There's a lot I can learn from your freewheeling style. The mana you've accumulated is amazing, seeing as how you went from not knowing anything to this. I'm more jealous of the mana you've accumulated, though." Contrary to Shin Woo, who controlled the mana itself, Kraisha had studied for countless years and ultimately developed a special method of causing the mana to change. If he changed mana purely through his will and the skill's ability, Kraisha calculated the countless ways in which the mana could change beforehand, and brought about the desired change at the right time. Shin Woo's method of handling magic was clumsy in comparison. It's not the way of a magician. But it's not the way a knight uses mana either. To be specific, Shin Woo, you seem like a monster gifted with supernatural powers. Isn't it because I'm an undead? Shin Woo flinched the moment she pointed that out, but he replied calmly for now. However, Kraisha firmly shook her head. An undead being can't control this many mana patterns. You may even understand the essence of mana more than I do. If I can imitate even just a part of what you do, my magic could undergo a groundbreaking change. Shin Woo, I don't understand this at all. You just memorize everything for now. It'll come up in the test. He was able to make some strides. Kraisha taught Shin Woo the theory established by scholars and magicians on mana, and he was able to figure out how to more effectively handle his mana, which he'd been manipulating instinctually up until now. On the other hand, Kraisha got a hint on how to improve her magic by learning about Shin Woo's skills and peculiar method of using magic, which went against common sense. "Ah, so this is how you do it. Just by introducing a few basic patterns, I can apply my magic much faster than before. How did you learn that already?" Ultimately, Shin Woo was successfully able to make large strides in magic 1 week into his contract with Kraisha. She thought if she taught him, it would be helpful to him someday, but he had advanced at a speed which went beyond her imagination. The low-rank mana bone skill has become LV10 and evolves to the intermediate level. Your understanding of magic deepens, and you can more effectively store more mana into your bones. The power of your mana increases as well. Magic has increased by 30. You have fulfilled a portion of the conditions necessary to achieve the Joker's innate skill. You have only 1 step left remaining before you become a true Joker. And at that very moment, Shin Woo got a message that he hadn't expected at all. A quest has occurred. Joker's mana. You are extremely free-spirited, and are capable of imitating anything. That's right. You can even imitate another person's mana. It's fine if you have a special mission, and if you don't, that's fine as well. Please acquire a high-ranked administrative authority by copying a golem's mana. Quest reward 3 permits to God's secret shop, Joker's innate skill. Chapter 15. I didn't think I'd get a quest here. Not to mention that it's a quest that pretty much read my mind. Shin Woo examined the quest details and was speechless. Of course, it was true that he wanted a high-rank administrator's authority in order to create a high-rank administrative seal, but to think it was connected to his Joker's karma. What's worse, it showed up as a quest. Plus, the quest acted as though it was only natural that he should possess an ability like that as a Joker, so he did feel a bit spiteful. Huh? A quest? That's right. Kraisha, whose mana affinity was comparable to Shin Woo's, sensed the flow of mana before her. Shin Woo nodded his head and Kraisha's lips slightly budged, but she soon slightly shook her head. It seems as though she was going to ask him about the quest but decided not to. It seems like your mana has increased considerably. You're right. It's because of you. It feels like I'll succeed too. Kraisha froze the mana in the air and attempted to make a statue. He couldn't tell in any detail what she was talking about just by watching her draw upon the ice element and utilize some sort of magical catalyst. I feel like I'll need to try the magic out in battle. Let's go hunting. Party hunting? Yeah. It wasn't an item originally included in their contract, but Shin Woo had just received a new, worrying task, though as worrying as it was, her offer didn't sound so bad. In other words, he was escaping reality right now, but it wouldn't be so bad to empty his head out first. Jin, what about you? I'd like to run a bit, too. Jin was in full agreement, as his head had been crammed with complicated theories regarding mana all week long. His ability to handle mana had improved significantly as well, and he wanted to apply that knowledge in live combat. Then, shall we go? By the way, I was thinking we should start skipping to the level 2 danger zones, commercial cities. I feel like we could go directly to the level 3 zones. What's your level, anyway? 6. He had a rough idea before, but she was at a much higher level than them. Shin Woo recollected their previous encounter and broke out into a cold sweat thinking, I sure blocked her magic well, despite her being such a higher level than me. We can't, since we're still too weak. In any case, let's go at it step by step. Shin Woo got on Jin's back and Kraisha used her magic to float into the air. When Shin Woo asked her how long she could stay in the air like that, she replied that she could maintain it all day. The mana consumption isn't severe, so long as I don't use teleportation magic. Magicians sure are scary. It's not something that any old magician can. Then, let's get going. Jin pretended to listen to Kraisha, who was overflowing with pride, and began to sprint. It was a perfect dash, befitting one who used to be a sprinter. It seemed like the shock would unearth the ground, and in the next instant, the landscape had already begun to change. Oh, hey! Kraisha was about to say something more, but stopped in shock and followed behind them. Shin Woo softly flicked Jin's head, who had elatedly dashed forward ahead of her. He wasn't a little kid teasing the girl he liked, so what the hell was he doing? Let's go south. There should still be a commercial city down there that our seniors haven't found yet. It'd be nice if there was a dungeon there. A dungeon with growing fruit trees. Because Shin Woo and Jin were undead, they didn't need to eat, but that wasn't the case for the other heroes. So after they ate the provisions they were given at the beginning, they would have to look for dungeons with either plants or animals, or buy supplies from the secret shop. Shin Woo only went to the secret shop whenever he leveled up to buy some good bones. He thought of it as more of a butcher's shop, but the other heroes considered it a place to buy food, a facility with more importance than any other. I like fruit too. Jin, you can't start thinking like that. My bad. It's not your fault. The most saddening thing from becoming undead wasn't the loss of sexual desire, or even the loss of their hair. It was that they couldn't eat anymore. They didn't even have the desire to eat anything, so that in itself was shocking to them, but if they started to think deeply upon the subject, they would truly become hopelessly depressed. They had been okay until now, since it had only been the two of them, but they'd become pointlessly conscious of it since traveling with a living being who requires nutrition, Kraisha. I'll kill that god someday. Yeah, That's the way to think. Shin Woo and Jin were fostering a hatred towards God. Who the hell could look at them and call them heroes? Krasia was just startled by their vigor. How long had they been running like that? If he was still in South Korea, it felt as though they had traveled from Seoul to Busan, and at that time, Krasia, who had been floating in the air, at a higher altitude than them, discovered something. Undead troops. Good. That means we're slowly getting closer to the city. Fundamentally, the undead had a tendency to repeat what they had done while they were still alive. The undead troops would flock to the cities to defend them, and it was highly likely that they were in the vicinity of a city. The undead are fighting amongst themselves, though. Ha! Soon, Shin Woo sensed it. Countless undead were fighting against a small minority of undead, possessing a powerful energy. To be exact, it was the magic of level 3 elite undead. Shin Woo suddenly realized what this magic was, which seemed to be drawing him somewhere, and yelled. Is it the Pauls by any chance? Could you please do something about that naming sense of yours? Pauls. Jin. Run fast. TCH. Full speed sprint. At that moment, Jin, who was plentifully fast enough, got even faster. Whether it were a tree, a rock, or even a forest, he would break through it all and run in a straight line to reach his destination. Through training, Jin could use his stats to their utmost for an instant, and Shin Woo inwardly named his ability to run like lightning the Pope, 1, sprint. Yeah, those guys are. Ah, Captain. Captain's come to save us. Everyone, raise your heads. Paul Zero is here. Even in the midst of battle, the undead were quick to notice Shin Woo and Jin, who had approached quickly. There were 22 Pauls that Shin Woo had personally named there, and they were fighting fiercely against a group of 300 undead. Against a group of undead that were at least level 2 or 3. Amongst them, there were even some level 4 undead mixed in. Shin Woo was surprised that the Pauls kept fighting and hadn't sustained any casualties yet. Paul Zero. Paul Zero. Are you perhaps on the same side of these crazy traitors? He didn't know how they had come to fight one another, but for starters, Shin Woo decided to help the Pauls. He naturally took out a melting double bone axe, threw it, and yelled. Love. Comes back. 2. How foolish of you to throw your weapon away. Oh. I said that it would come back, didn't I? The level 4 skeleton knight at the forefront easily parried the axe, but the axe, which had bounced into the air, flew back towards the knight, as if a rewind button had been pressed, causing its weapon to spring out of its hand. You bastard. I don't know what cowardly magic you used, but... Quong. However, the skeleton knight panicked, and the moment it bowed its head to pick up its weapon, the axe blew up in a grand explosion and spewed acid mist everywhere. The knight, who had been wide open, didn't even get the chance to raise its mana to resist, and was swept away by the explosion and completely destroyed. Shin Woo satisfyingly watched as the following acid mist melted away the undead battalion and yelled firmly. Pauls, retreat for now. I understand, Captain. In the time we haven't seen him, our captain's abilities have improved even further. The Pauls were awed at how commanding Shin Woo appeared, after taking down the level 4 skeleton knight, and retreated from the battlefield. Right on time, Krasia arrived on the battlefield and gazed at Shin Woo disbelievingly. You can command the undead? What exactly are you? Call me Paul Zero right now. Also, there are good undead in this world too, you know. I'll explain later, so take down those undead for now. Paul Zero. Good undead. How can this be? She's alive. Ooh, so it was possible to break free of the curse. Shin Woo's words were like a riddle, and Krasia tilted her head. The Pauls who had seen her cheered. Rather than burning with hatred towards the living, they were actually happy to see her. What is happening? Krasia was much too unfamiliar with the Paul's response, and thought that her understanding of the undead until now had been wrong. Yet, while confirming that, she turned her head, only to find that a battalion of undead had discovered her, and were yelling in hatred. A living person! A person with flowing blood and fresh flesh! I hate you! That woman's definitely the person who made us like this. Let's make her just like us. We'll rip out her hair, rip off her flesh, and suck the blood out of her. Truly gruesome and brutal lines just kept coming. Ironically, their statements set her at ease. With her mind at ease, she cast her magic upon the skeletons. Ice arrow shower. It's magic. Call our magicians. But our magicians are guarding the walls. Guak. The large-scale spell that came from a level 6 magician was tremendous. Several hundreds of ice arrows formed into the air, packed tightly, and poured upon the battlefront. Even level 3 skeletons couldn't easily approach, and the level 2 weaklings were just immediately destroyed by the arrows. Normally, I would buy time like this and would press my advantage with a more effective spell, but she didn't have the spare time to do so right now. Why? Because Shin Woo would take them all down if she wasted time. At least, that's what Kreisha thought. In reality, that's what was currently happening. Shin Woo and Jin had already gallantly charged in with Shin Woo swinging his giant axe, breaking them into pieces. We could have become good friends, too. Sorry, Pauls. Guak. And now I'll finally be able to rest in. The weak skeleton that had once needed to act in order to barely defeat a skeleton soldier didn't exist anymore. Even if Shin Woo was trapped in a drill ground filled with level 3 skeletons, they wouldn't be able to handle him. His long-distance explosive attack through Rule of Bone wasn't the only thing powerful about him. He had accumulated various knowledge regarding magic, and developed a solid foundation for close-quarters combat where such magic could be applied. Shin Woo's axe was now covered in lightning, albeit weak, and the skeletons in the area were brutally burned or crushed. The rare weapon technique, Bursting Thunder, was finally starting to bear fruit. But I'm not there yet. When I'm finally able to produce lightning all on my own with my mana, maybe I'll get some kind of hint that helps me with mimicking a golem's mana. He had come here to clear his mind, yet even as he thought about that damn golem. Shin Woo smiled bitterly while rotating his arm and swinging his axe. Then, a skeleton knight attacked from behind, and Shin Woo's axe clashed with its sword. He shattered the sword without much difficulty. His reaction was only possible because of his exceptional, developed mana senses. How is this possible? My sword, tempered with my loyalty to the Emperor, has been. It seems like you just weren't loyal enough. He replied uninterested and cut off the knight's head with power slash. Beyond the corpse of the dead knight's crumbling body, he saw the leftover bones littering the battlefield. The battle was over in the blink of an eye. It was a complete victory. So you're saying that you intuitively sensed each other and joined forces? That's correct. Following the battle's completion, Shin Woo listened to how the Pauls had fared thus far whilst collecting the loot from hundreds of undead. Honestly, there wasn't much to speak of. It was simple. They just sensed a similar energy emanating from the Pauls that had left the city and were wandering around. As a result, they were able to group up in one place. There were 22 Pauls who had gathered like that, and in terms of groups, there were 3. He thought this might be happening in other regions of the Empire and felt somewhat strange. We gathered like that, so it was about time for us to go look for General Sigald. But we came across a battalion that was patrolling the area and we approached them because we thought they might be. They quickly realized that our energy was different from theirs, so they became hostile. Since they ordered us to go and meet their lord, as well as prove that we were truly soldiers of the Empire, we had no choice but to fight them. The Lord, he'd roughly heard about it from his seniors. The Lords were individuals without much power, but were undead who experienced a special transformation that enabled them to command other undead. The undead under their direct command were incomparably powerful and quick, so apparently it would take a lot of effort to take them on. Apparently, the fact that it was a huge city didn't necessarily mean that a lord would be present, but it seems like they'd hit the jackpot. Though there's absolutely nothing to be afraid of. Shin Woo and Jin were ridiculously strong for their level, not to mention the level 6 magician, Kreisha. Kreisha couldn't believe what was happening and directed her gaze solely at Shin Woo. The Pauls seemed to think that this was their chance and asked Shin Woo, "Who is this magician?" She came from the outside to help. She's cooperating with me to turn the situation in the Empire around. As expected of our captain. You sure know a lot of people. To be cooperating with a magician who seems even more powerful than Dr. Ataran. As always, Shin Woo lied without even changing his tone of voice, and the elite skeletons marveled at him and applauded. Seeing that, Kraisha completely gave up on understanding the situation at hand. And beside her, Jin looked as though he understood how she felt, as he was nodding his head. Besides, how surprised was he when he had first seen Shin Woo revive these guys into elite skeletons. We were thinking of clearing out that city. I'll lead you guys for a bit. Will you follow me? Of course. If everyone else agrees, I'll likewise follow your command. I feel a bit stronger just being by your side, Captain. It probably wasn't just a feeling. In no time at all, Shin Woo's command skill had become low rank level 3, which possessed the ability of strengthening his subordinates by just a little. Then, Shin, no. Paul 0. Are we going to raid the city like this? It wouldn't be very tough to do so, but... Shin Woo examined the Afar wall. It might have been due to time, but half of the wall had crumbled and didn't seem to evoke a huge sense of danger, but the energy coming from the swarming undead within was quite formidable. We don't need to go the hard way when the easy way is available to us. Wouldn't it be stupid to attack the front? Then are we infiltrating the city and assassinating the Lord? Kraisha spoke. It was a common strategy for when there weren't many elite soldiers gathered. Shin Woo uncertainly nodded his head. Yeah, we probably need to kill the Lord who's in command. If we don't, it'll become tough for us. What do you mean tough on us? Ah. Jin was the first to realize what Shin Woo was talking about. The blue goblin fire in his eye sockets momentarily spread out lengthways. You're really cruel. You know that? Thanks for the compliment. Kraisha tilted her head at their conversation. Shin Woo brushed it aside and laughed as if it were nothing, and said something important this time. I'd like to buy the bones of the skeletons you just hunted. Is that all right? Bones? Do you have a skill that uses bones by any chance? It's probably a skill you received from God. Perhaps your ability to alter your magic in a variety of ways and utilize it comes from. You're mostly right. It might have been because she was a magician, but she sure picked up on things quick. Shin Woo grinned and nodded his head. I thought about hiding it at first, but I thought it wasn't really necessary. Over the past week, they'd observed each other's magic and conversed about skills, and in that process, Kraisha had already roughly figured out what Shin Woo's ability was. Honestly, all Shin Woo had asked for was for her to sell the bones, but hadn't she responded in a way that was essentially saying, yes. He had nothing to be hesitant about, as she was thinking about whether to hide the fact that she knew or not. I'll just give them to you for free. In exchange, let me see what that skill looks like. That's not hard, but I'll pay the price. Since it's a reasonable price for the karma. Ah, and you guys, gather the bones of the enemies you kill, too. Did you say bones? Ah, I understand. Perhaps it was because the command skill was in effect, but despite it being a questionable order, the Pauls moved obediently. While they were doing so, Shin Woo received all of Kraisha's bones. It was impossible to price them like a proper merchant, so he paid for them with what he thought was the likely asking price. Because he had hunted down so many golems, which dropped a lot of perium, it didn't even really make much of dent. Then let's pick out the level 4 knight's bones. And you never know, so pick out a few of the level 3 bones too. What are you going to do with those bones? Bone reinforcement. Kraisha asked with an excited expression, and Shin Woo unhesitatingly activated bone reinforcement before her. The skeleton knight's rib bone was completely absorbed by Shin Woo, and its knowledge, experiences, mana and strength all flowed into him. Of course, since Shin Woo was already level 4, he couldn't receive many stats from the bone anymore, but his true objective wasn't the subpar stat increase. Strength has increased by 1. You have relatively perfectly absorbed the target's memories and experiences. You have acquired a 1% skill proficiency in horseback riding. You have acquired a 0.3% skill proficiency in bursting thunder. You have acquired a 0.1% skill proficiency in combat sense. Oh ho, you dare challenge me? Hear me, you fools. If you think that I, Sir Palin, will tell you about my sexual techniques, then. Knight Palin. Li Shin Woo retched at the centrally flowing memories. The knight wasn't even trying to piss someone off, yet the most impressive memory was his talk with the other soldiers about his sexual techniques. The remaining individuals in his memory had become skeletons as well, and had ultimately fallen in vain like this. There was nothing more pitiful than this. What kind of memory was it to get you frowning like that? It's nothing. It was just a sad story. You don't need to worry about it too much. What the hell was that mana effect? It was hard to understand, but I caught a brief glimpse of the magic sublimating. If I knew this was going to happen, I would have asked God for a skill as well. Who? Li Shin Woo took a deep breath to calm his breathing whilst more thoroughly going through the memories he'd absorbed from Sir Palin. Normally, the higher leveled the undead, the more detailed their memories were, and those memories not only increased his combat abilities, but could also provide him with information he didn't have. Like right now. This asshole memorized all the routes to the red light district. Because of that, he knew the ways to sneak into the outskirts of the city. Though his normal behavior was filthy, Li Shin Woo was able to extract considerably high-quality information from him. Li Shin Woo continuously absorbed the other knight's bones as well, and was able to ascertain where the Lord lived when he was alive, as well as the positions his guards were stationed. I obviously don't know if everything stayed the same since they've turned into the undead, but it's worth betting on. In order to supplement the incomplete information, he absorbed a few of the level 3 skeleton bones as well, and perfectly formulated the route to infiltrate into the city. Kraisha marveled at him and fixed her gaze on him. It seemed as though she couldn't completely understand the skill as she was furrowing her brow. How is this possible? You're absorbing the innate mana within the bones in their entirety. I understand that they're all bones, so that it reduces the potential conflict, but I don't understand anything beyond that. I know that there's some sort of mana disassembly process as well as a reconstruction process. Captain, we've gathered the bones. Li Shin Woo turned away from Kraisha, who sounded like a broken record, and faced the skeletons. Each of them clutched an armful of bones to their bodies, and because they hadn't seen Li Shin Woo use bone reinforcement, their voices were still inquisitive. What should we do now? Are you going to hold a funeral for these guys? Everyone, listen up, Li Shin Woo said instantly. His voice was so dignified that even Kraisha flinched, so how would the Pauls have reacted? They stood upright and focused on Li Shin Woo. However, Jin was the only one that quickly figured out what he was doing, thinking, he's starting to act dogging. I want you guys not to hate those that you've killed. But these guys attacked us. These guys were afflicted by the curse and have even lost their reasoning. Li Shin Woo nodded his head weightily, as if agreeing with what they'd said, yet at the next moment, his eye sockets blazed with red goblin fire and spoke with a strong tone. Like a general. They were also soldiers and knights who cared for the Empire and respected General Sagald while they were still alive, just like you. You can't deny them of even that. Of course, that's true, but you guys will be faced with several similar situations in the future. You'll have to shoulder the deaths of those who were once your comrades on your backs. Li Shin Woo said, and grabbed one of the bones they were carrying. Regardless of whether he flinched or not, Li Shin Woo placed bone on the Paul's forehead. So, this is sign of their repentance, and represents their will as well. It's something they've desperately left behind, at the moment of their deaths. And I can personally instill their wills into you. How? Bone reinforcement. The Paul, who'd become the target of his bone reinforcement, shook as though it had been shocked by an electric current. The bones it was holding rumbled and fell to the ground with a dull sound. Hearing that, the surrounding Pauls took a step back in shock. However, in the very next moment, how can this be? The Paul spoke deafeningly and plopped down. If it were human, its eyes would be flowing with tears. Their will is so clear. They truly were soldiers who loved this empire. Hey, Paul 47. Are you okay? What exactly happened? Paul 47. Hearing its comrades call for it, Paul 47 raised its head and responded deafeningly once more. I inherited their will. Captain revealed their will to me. Their will. The wills of the soldiers who had become undead? Our captain is definitely an emissary of God sent to save the Empire. He not only restored our minds to us, but also allows us to ruminate over those sacrificed and killed. Paul 47 spoke as if touched and gathered all of the bones that had dropped onto the floor. Shin Woo thought it was being unnecessarily loud, yet spoke solemnly. Now do you understand? Their wills. Of course. Please allow me to inherit all these guys' wills. These guys are already dead, so they don't have a will of their own anymore, but still. We'll become one and live on. Paul 47 was touched and yelled. At that moment, Shin Woo saw this message in front of him. The LV3 elite cursed skeleton, Paul 47, has become your subordinate. So long as you do not discard him, he will faithfully obey any order you give him. The low-rank command skill has become LV4. All stats have increased by 1. You can more effectively draw out the strength of your subordinates. Shin Woo had established a new relationship aside from the contractual one with Jin. He had formed a master-servant relationship. Rather than using a sound argument, you used your actions and the mood to impress others. You lied so naturally that they weren't even suspicious of you. The acting skill has become LV10. If you dress up, your acting ability increases further. The moment he successfully accepted Paul 47 as his subordinate, his acting skill naturally leveled up. Shin Woo, who was neither a general or a knight of the Empire, was able to put up quite the convincing act, so it was only natural that he was able to make Paul 47, who was originally a soldier of the Empire, into his subordinate. Is it at the level where I can naturally fool others, even if I don't lie? Shin Woo was impressed by his own accomplishment. Though it was a spur-of-the-moment thing due to the favorable situation and mood, he was able to get a taste of a higher-leveled skill due to its level up, and the experience he'd gained was no joke. He felt overwhelmingly confident that he'd be able to lie his way out any situation. You fraud. Paul 0, you're amazing. Seeing that, Jin was amazed, and narrowed his eyes and muttered. However, it seemed Kraisha was touched by Shin Woo's speech and Paul 47's declaration as she applauded. She may be good at magic, but that's all. She was completely fooled. Will you be able to inherit their wills? Of course, Captain. Good. Bone reinforcement. Paul 47 had much more backbone than Jin. Shin Woo looked back at Jin and shook his head at him, as if saying, look at him. Jin looked like he'd burst into tears, and repeatedly used bone reinforcement on Paul 47. There were some of the bones he'd bought off Kraisha mixed in. They were level 2 or 3 bones that wouldn't have much effect on him, so he'd bought them to reinforce the Pauls. It feels like my body will break. Go ahead. Break. And then, be reborn. I understand, Captain. I'll be reborn as a new Paul 47. Please allow me to inherit their wills as well, Captain. Me too. Please allow me to as well. Seeing Paul 47 being strengthened in real time, as well as inheriting the wills of the deceased knights and soldiers, the other Pauls realized that Shin Woo's words were no lie. Sure enough, each of them scrambled and extended their bones forward, pestering him to reinforce them. Originally, all the Pauls here didn't trust Shin Woo 100%, and some of the Pauls amongst them just thought of him as an ally and superior, but they didn't need to pledge their loyalty to him, in other words, a company commander. Though there were those that had thought of him as such, that didn't really matter anymore. Since to them, Shin Woo was someone who loved the Empire beyond any other, and was a hero who inherited the wills of the dearly departed. I feel their wills living and breathing within me. I'm Paul 101. I'll protect the Empire, fight within the Empire, and die with the Empire. Shin Woo, isn't this a bit dangerous? Jin was frightened, seeing the Pauls absorbing several dozens of bones in place with about half of them yelling crazily, and spoke into Shin Woo's ear. Shin Woo just calmly nodded his head. Of course it's dangerous. They're filled with incomplete memories already, and I've mixed in several dozens of foreign memories into them, so it wouldn't be strange for them to lose themselves. Then why did you do it all at once? Since it'll be easier to fool them then. Plus, it'd be helpful in planting a false sense of loyalty in them. Within their feeble minds, the Pauls anchored themselves onto one thing amidst the flowing memories: their hatred towards the curse that had destroyed the empire. Shin Woo had instigated that hatred, and was giving them cause to follow him blindly. It was fine if he erased all the unnecessary memories, so long as their combat techniques remained. You're a demon. My name is Paul 49. Henceforth, I'll follow Captain and stake my life on reclaiming the light of the Empire. What a great goal, Paul 49. Then, next. Paul 102. I'm all ready. It seemed like a pseudo-religious baptismal ceremony, and also the site of collective madness. The Pauls approached Shin Woo in order, offering their bones. About half of them kneeled before him, and while maintaining his solemn expression, Shin Woo targeted them and used bone reinforcement. After going through bone reinforcement, the Pauls who had been slightly suspicious of Shin Woo acted as though they would stake everything for him instead, and the mood stunk of solemnity. Extremely speaking, it was like they were willing to forfeit the last remaining drumstick to him after ordering chicken. Are you the last one? That's right, Captain. Though there aren't that many, I did kill these guys. Oh. The last remaining Paul was Paul 41. However, the bone that it was carrying was a masterpiece. It was a level 4 skeleton knight's hand bone. You fought him one-on-one? That's correct. It may seem obvious, but each of the Pauls were born in a different environment from the others and participated in different experiments, so they each possessed different latent potential and starting abilities. They were all similarly level 3, but as there were some level 3s who possessed stats close to 400, there were also level 3s with stats close to 800. If it was able to take down a level 4 skeleton knight, then it must be really close to an 800 stat total. Its posture was different from the other Pauls, and seeing as how it waited for all the other Pauls to be reinforced before coming forward, it seemed to have a solid intellect as well. But what if I were to steal this bone and use it on myself? It definitely didn't seem like a very attractive option. The opportunity cost of using the level 4 skeleton knight bone was much too high, as it would just provide him with subpar stat gains and experiences compared to an elite level 4 monster. If that's the case, then... Shin Woo nodded his head and raised the hand bone, placing it atop Paul 41's forehead. Their wills will make you even stronger than before. Bone reinforcement. Thank you, Captain. I'll trust and follow you. By consuming the LV4 skeleton knight's hand bone, the LV3 elite cursed skeleton, Paul 41 is being reinforced. You have made him into your subordinate. But at that very moment, a blinding light surged from Paul 41's body. And simultaneously, the curse that covered his body was amplified and covered his entire body. In the secret facility where the Paul 40 line of skeletons were born, they attempted to block the undead curse by steeping them into a curse beforehand. That curse was an aging curse. Since they were skeletons, they weren't weakened by the curse. It was similar to when he had first awakened as an elite monster, but comparatively, it was a much more powerful outburst of energy. Shin Woo thought that perhaps, and soon had a hunch. This guy was leveling up right now. He had completely passed the threshold of 800 total stats. Your subordinate, Paul 41, has evolved into a LV4 elite doom factor. He has learned a method of releasing the curse energy surrounding him to destroy others. The day he learns to use this to its full ability will be the day he is reborn as a true disaster. What a cool name! It could be even cooler than a Joker apprentice. But the moment Shin Woo writhed in jealously, his own skill underwent a trivial, no, a huge change. The bone reinforcement skill has become LV6. You have learned how to select the best bones. When you personally defeat a monster, you can obtain 2 bones if you are lucky. What? Normally, the moment one kills a monster, the clump of mana that cannot be reduced naturally remains as loot. Whether it be gear, bones, or skin. But because his bone reinforcement skill leveled up, he now had a chance to acquire 2 bones at one time. I don't know the specifics, but I've hit the jackpot. The Doom Factor, Paul 41, who'd finished evolving and stood on his own, looked at him with loving eyes. He couldn't believe that he too had black goblin fire blazing in his eye sockets and looked at Shin Woo with endearing eyes. This is the strength I've gained because of you, Captain. I pledge my loyalty to you, Captain. Don't pledge your loyalty to me. Instead, pledge that you'll purify the Empire. Captain. His loyalty was increasing by the minute. Paul 41 seemed to have been touched and bowed his head, then Shin Woo gave him another order. From now on, you're in charge of these Pauls. You're their commander, all right? I understand. Good answer. That was the moment when the elite battalion led by the level 4 elite Doom Factor was born. Seeing Paul 41, Shin Woo formulated a new plan in his head. If he could use bone reinforcement on the others and make them into his subordinates. If he were able to make the skeletons born from the Anti-Skull Project into his subordinates. Then, he'd have a formidable army that no one could ignore. And if I were to add golems into the mix as well. Shin Woo's jaw creaked in satisfaction, already thinking about how prosperous his future would be. Jin thought he looked really evil, but Kraisha admired Shin Woo's ability to manipulate the undead's feelings and instantaneously acquire their absolute loyalty. You have the qualities of a leader. More like the qualities of a swindler. I'm going to scout out and assassinate the Lord, so Kraisha, you stay on standby with these guys and rush in when I give the signal. Shin Woo, who'd completely used all of the bones to strengthen the Pauls, decided to travel incognito next. Since they had already annihilated 1 skeleton battalion, he didn't know how the skeletons stationed in the city would react. It would be better if he acted before some special change occurred. Jin, you're with me. Okay. It would be difficult to find them, unless they were as skilled as Kraisha, if Shin Woo and Jin formed a connection and moved stealthily. He didn't need to separate from Jin just because he wanted to travel incognito. Truthfully, the Pauls were startled as soon as Shin Woo got atop Jin's back and activated stealth. Where did Captain go? Everyone, stay calm. We'll move when we get the signal. Until then, sharpen your swords and wait. Beside them, Kraisha was calmly lost in thought. She had investigated the mystery known as bone reinforcement and was anguished over whether she could apply the same method she'd seen to her own magic. The fact that she had something to study after crossing over to this world filled her with delight. When they had gotten far from the group, Jin asked Shin Woo what he'd been concerned about. Hey, Shin Woo, are you going to bring those guys with you now? Nope. While it's nice that they've become a usable fighting force, it'd be kind of weird to travel with them, wouldn't it? It might have been okay traveling with them when he was still alone, but it would a hassle lugging all of them around everywhere. From the start, he'd done this on a whim. He didn't need to put too much importance on them. But if they develop well, I should be able to use them properly then. You're really amazing, man. I know. Shin Woo replied coolly and activated Bone Armory, covering his entire body with armor. He equipped the helmet, body armor, and even the lower body armor. He was fully armed, aside from his weaponry. Though the appearance, as well as the materials were different for each piece of armor, equipping them all strangely made him look like a knight. You're going to act again, aren't you? Be careful starting now. Walls enclosed the city on all 4 sides. Of course, Shin Woo naturally figured out where their guard was weakest, as he'd absorbed the knights' and soldiers' memories, and when they'd gotten in the vicinity of the city walls, he led Jin away from their prying eyes. How do you think they formed this underground empire? And how was it maintained? The fact that this commercial city thrived means that it independently developed several of its own industries underground. They probably used those amazing technical skills to build the empire. Why would they go underground when they had such technical skill? One would often forget that they were actually underground, unless they stared at the far distant ceiling. Moreover, there are underground areas in the underground empire, and the weather, as well as night and day, are mostly controlled through magic. Maybe the empire even had rivers and oceans. No, they definitely existed here. I wonder. Maybe there were too many people above ground. I wonder what it looks like above ground. Shin Woo could tell that Jin was feeling restless, perhaps because he'd met someone alive, Kratia. He could completely understand how he was feeling. He was happy that he could sympathize with him. Shin Woo calmly stroked his back and comforted him. We should be able to see it someday. We'll definitely be able to if we continue to grow like this. Thanks, Shin Woo. I'm the one who should be thankful. Then, shall we infiltrate the city? Yeah. While they were sheltered by the low-rank level 9 stealth, the two entered into the outskirts of the city through a doghole, infiltrating into the slums. Compared to a small town filled with level 1 or 2 skeletons, the size of the city, as well as its quality, were worlds apart. This was the moment that the two had entered a true undead city. The city, several dozens of years following the fall of the Empire, looked truly wretched. It had only been dozens of years since, yet the sturdy bricks and cement, and the houses formed of a material foreign to them had mostly fallen apart. The undead curse not only transformed living beings into the undead, but also withered away and killed anything that was still alive, so it was only natural that the city was in this state. It truly was a curse that killed the world itself. Whenever he looked at it this way, he realized how frightening the curse actually was. The other cities we've gone to weren't like this. That's because those cities were small. And they were on the outskirts. Since there wasn't much in those cities, it didn't look as bad. Shin Woo was definitely right. The cities they'd passed by until now didn't have an assortment of goods, but this unknown city possessed huge walls, a commercial district, as well as a slum area. There were streets leading to the houses, a city hall, as well as traces of various people in different places trading with each other. It wasn't just leftover goods, there were also traces of people. The weather's great. It seems like it'll rain soon. Ha! Did you hear that the Lord is coming to visit this street today? The only undead they'd met before entering the city had been an undead battalion in the middle of patrolling, but after entering the city, their surroundings were littered with undead. It might have seemed obvious, but just because it was a danger level 2 zone didn't mean that there were high-level undead everywhere. Rather, most of them were level 1 undead. They didn't really have any special features, and the only piece of information that appeared was LV1 skeleton. If they were still human, they probably would have shown up as LV1 human. Haha, that costs 3 perium. I can't give you a discount. That's too expensive. Then throw in that small one, too. How is this possible? Jin had forgotten that they were traveling incognito and spoke stiffly. Shin Woo could understand how he was feeling. That's because the skeletons were haggling over a valueless rock. They're repeating what they did when they were still alive. The lower leveled the undead, the more they rely on their instincts. I was looking forward to it a little bit. Jin, who realized that speaking a little louder wouldn't release stealth, spoke bitterly. I may just be speaking nonsense, as the skeletons you've made into your subordinates abandoned their still alive general and decided to follow you as their captain, but in any case, they're acting based on their own will. Yeah. One couldn't say the Paul's conditions were normal either. But despite being tricked by Shin Woo, they definitely understood that they had become skeletons and moved accordingly. Just that was enough to make them look normal. I've restored their egos and even give them a name. I really am like their savior. No, that's not what I'm saying. Jin denied him right away. At the beginning, he wondered why Shin Woo had set the skeletons free, but he'd ultimately turned them into his subordinates once they seemed like they would be useful. Shin Woo's fickleness was truly frightening. The only thing he was sure of was that Shin Woo would always be true to himself. It felt a bit awkward thinking about it any further, so he decided to change topics. Is killing them the only way to save them? Don't misunderstand. They're already dead. Even if you talk to them, they probably don't even remember their names. Then what about us? We're undead, too. We can say our names. That means we're not dead. It sounded quite simple, but there was a much more complicated meaning within that statement. Whenever Shin Woo would say something like this, Jin would admire him a bit, but he didn't really want to accept that Shin Woo had more knowledge or wisdom than him when he was already stronger than him as well, so he didn't say it out loud. There are a lot of level 1s here, but it's not a danger level 2 zone for nothing. The closer we get to the center of the city, the more tightly guarded it'll be, so focus on your connection with me. Mine's at beginner LV7, so it won't be tough for me. Of course, Jin didn't have the ability to learn stealth, but while going through a few small towns, they discovered a rural rat nest dungeon. Shin Woo gave Jin all of the rat bones, and as a result, he was barely able to learn stealth. Both of them knew the same skill, so it was easy to raise the effectiveness of his skill through their connection. Through the connection from the horseback riding skill, the stealth skill's effectiveness increases. In special situations, the skill proficiency rapidly increases. Shin Woo and Jin took the opportunity and escaped the notice of the two skeletons, who were stuck in the past, and slowly went around the city like ghosts. The shadows cast by the ruined buildings easily concealed them, and they observed the city, as if they were memorizing every facet of it. We shouldn't even worry about the level 2 ones, right? They're at least level 3 elites over here. We don't need to count them if they're not even level 3 elites. No matter how strong they were, they wouldn't be able to handle overwhelming numbers. That's how Shin Woo had thought in the past. However, that was something that only applied to Earth. Even if thousands of level 3 golems came rushing at him right now, he was confident that he could take them all on without even breaking a single bone. There was the fact that there was an overwhelming disparity between their stats, but also because undead possessed the special characteristic of never physically tiring. And that's also the same for skeletons, as well. But that also meant that there was a high possibility that he would be helpless against a higher-leveled undead. Those were the ones that Shin Woo had to find and kill first. Of course, it wouldn't have been too difficult for them to just straight-up attack them since they had the level 6 magician, Kraisha, but since she would reduce their contribution, they had moved quickly. Honestly, I wanted to take my time and look around, as this is the first city that seems big enough to be called a city. They had pretty much finished up clearing the outskirts of the empire, so now it was time to deal with the danger level 2 zones. It wasn't a bad idea to go through the cities and ascertain their levels while they still had the assistance of a level 6 magician. Though of course, each city would have their own specific circumstances. There are a lot of knights. There are at least 10 skeleton knights above the walls, and there are 5 knights that periodically go on a patrol. And there are 30 of them on standby in shifts inside of their private barracks. If a hero were acting alone, they would likely feel terrified at around this time. Because they only had one life, they wouldn't have been able to boldly infiltrate the city like Shin Woo, and they wouldn't even dream of attacking the city by themselves. It would definitely be impossible for a level 4 hero, and even if they were level 5. It would only be possible with a few level 5 heroes. Shin Woo suddenly realized why heroes preferred going through dungeons. The cities were huge and difficult to kill. Undead popped out in various areas. On the other hand, monsters popped out regularly in the dungeon, and would provide a more definite reward, so it was the much more attractive option. Shino Rendu. Even though it's a danger level 2 zone, it would still take more than a year to fully clear it with a few people. Take down the high priority targets first, and then look for the right opportunity to take down the rest. Remember, Shin Woo. Your life is most important. Shino Rendu was the most hot-blooded amongst his seniors, and even he spoke like that. So he could understand why his seniors grew so slowly. He could even understand why they cheered whenever they discovered a dungeon. Shin Woo. Shin Woo heard Jin's voice and then froze too. When he, who had been lost in thought, raised his head, he understood why Jin's voice was so stiff. In an area slightly askew to the city's center square, and in front of an imposing mansion above a sloping road, there was a giant monster roaming around. No, it was a golem. It wasn't just a normal golem either. It boasted a height of around 4 meters, and its imposingness seemed unshakable. LV5 Iron Golem, I0918, Elite. A level 5 golem. As he thought, after the bronze golem was the iron golem, the one he was most worried about. It had only gone from level 4 to level 5, yet why did it suddenly seem so upgraded? When he thought about it, the difference between level 4 and 5 was like the difference between the heaven and the earth, so he could roughly understand too. Shin Woo, you haven't seen it yet, huh? The golem's not the problem. No, it is a problem. Why is the golem living in a place outside of where it was produced? No. Shin Woo was speaking and then stopped, groaning at his stupidity. Why were the golems created from the very beginning? It was probably to protect the empire. Of course, after the fall of the empire, the several golems didn't have a place to go and were abandoned, but until then, the manufactured golems were probably sent to various regions in the empire. And that golem was one of them. There's something controlling that golem. Something controlling it. Shin Woo was shocked. And despite yelling in shock, his stealth wasn't released. That fact shocked him even more. What's worse, at that moment, his skill leveled up. The low-rank stealth skill has become level 10 and evolved into the intermediate level. You do not possess the talent to covertly kill your opponent, but you do possess the ability to move secretly and quickly. You have learned the intermediate shadow sprint skill. Agility and magic have increased by 10. The higher the skill level, the lighter the shadow. I lost combat sprint and gained shadow sprint. How ironic. Moreover, he could use this skill in tandem with his connection with Jin to draw out its full ability, making it a truly effective skill. Shin Woo was satisfied by the result that came out from his negligence and smiled. Jin called out to him with a cold voice. If you're done checking out your skill, then could you start checking that guy now? Ah, my bad. He scratched his hairless head and looked at the area that Jin had pointed at. It was the mansion's balcony, and he could see the undead that stood at the balcony. It was a level 5 undead, and it was none other than the Lord, the skeleton commander. And gripped within its emaciated finger bones, there was a core. It felt as though he'd received a blunt impact to his head. That's right. They couldn't control the golem's mana on the outside, so they would instead control the core that produced their mana. Shin Woo had never enlisted the aid of an object to help him radiate his mana, so he'd never thought about it before. But is that the only option available? If the core could change even an undead's mana to that of a golem's, then wouldn't there be no reason that he, who had absorbed the golem's magic knowledge and everything, couldn't do the same? Hadn't he been thinking about this too complicatedly? Guillotine Steelworker might have caused him to tunnel vision on his statement that none other than the golems could create that seal, and had approached the matter in a much more complicated way than needed. It was time to start fresh. I feel like I'll be able to know for sure after killing that guy and examining the core. Hold on, Shin Woo. The shriek of the dead doesn't work on golems. Yeah, that's a good point. They could only see one outside, but considering how they could feel the same quality of mana within the mansion, there weren't just one or two golems. They didn't know if they could take care of the golems quickly, and if they factored in the concentration of knights nearby the mansion, it would be best to retreat. Yeah, I got it. Let's give up on killing the Lord first. Let's start at another place. Just not here. That's a good idea. There were several sections of this city that they hadn't checked yet. Shin Woo and Jin completely backed off from the Lord's mansion in order to perfectly conquer the city without injury. 40 minutes later, horrific screams resounded through the city. The battle had just begun,